Michael Flores never meant for anyone to hear him tell his daughter they couldn't afford the birthday cake she wanted. But in a crowded Seattle bakery, his whispered confession caught the attention of Caroline Sanders, a billionaire CEO who had everything except the warmth she saw in their little family. Her unexpected act of kindness that day would pull their worlds together, colliding pride, privilege, and a love none of them saw coming. Michael Flores never imagined a simple trip to a Seattle bakery would expose the quiet truth he worked so hard to hide. He stood in line with his daughter, Lily, surrounded by marble countertops, warm lights, and rows of pastries that looked like they belonged on magazine covers instead of real life. The sweet smell of sugar and butter should have made the morning feel special. But all Micah could think about was the worn state of his wallet tucked inside his jacket. He had promised Lily she could choose any birthday cake she wanted, but now, standing here, he wasn't sure how he'd keep that promise. He had done the math 3 times the night before: rent, groceries, gas. The new sneakers Lily needed for preschool, and no matter how he shifted the numbers, the money never stretched far enough. But seeing her excitement had made him believe, even if only for a moment, that maybe he could give her one perfect memory. Now, watching her tiny fingers press against the bakery glass, leaving foggy prints as she squealed about strawberry frosting and chocolate layers, he felt that familiar knot tighten in his stomach. Lily was 4 today, all bright eyes and messy curls, trusting him completely. She didn't understand the weight pressing on his shoulders or the exhaustion of living paycheck to paycheck in a city as expensive as Seattle. Michael had learned to live lean, making repairs stretch longer than they should, skipping meals when bills piled up, taking extra shifts at the garage whenever possible. But none of that showed on his face as he knelt beside her. He did what he always did: smiled for her. Because that's what fathers did, they smiled even when everything hurt. The bakery crowd shuffled forward, the quiet hum of conversation creating a backdrop that made Michael feel even more out of place. The families around him wore Patagonia jackets and designer sneakers, ordering custom cakes without even glancing at the prices. He tugged at the sleeve of his old work jacket, noticing a grease stain he hadn't been able to scrub out. His boots were worn, his hands rough from years of repairs, and he felt every pair of polished eyes glance past him without seeing him at all. Lily tugged his sleeve, bouncing on her toes as the line moved. "Daddy, can I get the one with the strawberries? It looks like the one Mommy used to make." The words hit him like a punch. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to nod. Lily barely remembered her mother's small flashes of voice, warmth, and the smell of vanilla. But every now and then, a memory resurfaced, and it made Michael's heart twist in ways he could never explain. He wanted today to be joyful for her, not heavy with loss. The display case glowed as they reached the front. The cake Lily wanted sat perfectly centered on a silver tray, bright berries arranged in spirals, cream smooth and glossy. It looked like happiness. It looked like everything a child should have on her birthday. And it cost 3 times what Michael had expected. The number on the tag made his breath hitch. He opened his wallet anyway, as if hoping the bills inside had multiplied since last night. They hadn't. He counted fast, praying it wasn't enough, not even close. For a moment he froze, fingers tightening around the thin stack of bills, feeling the weight of failure sink into his bones. He had worked so hard to make this day special. Yet here he was stuck again between what he wished he could give Lily and what he actually could. Lily was still smiling up at him, trusting him to say yes. She didn't see the panic in his eyes. She didn't understand what it meant for a grown man to stand in a room full of people and realize he couldn't give his daughter something as simple as a birthday cake. He felt the pressure of eyes around him, though no one was actually watching. It was a familiar sensation, the way poverty made you feel visible and invisible at the same time. He wished he could disappear, wished he didn't have to say the words he knew were coming, wished life didn't force him to break promises he desperately wanted to keep. Lily tugged his sleeve again. "Daddy, this one, please." Her voice was soft and full of hope, and something inside Michael cracked. He bent down, struggling to steady his breathing as he prepared to tell her the truth. Not a comforting version, not a softened version, just the truth he hated. The truth he tried to protect her from every day. The truth that made him feel small. He looked into her warm brown eyes, so much like her mother's, and whispered the hardest words he'd had to say in months. "Sweetheart, we can't afford that one." The world didn't stop, but it felt like it should have. Lily blinked, confusion blooming across her face. She looked back at the cake, then at him, and he saw the moment she understood, not fully, not deeply, but enough to accept it. Children understood disappointment too well. She took a small step back, lowering her head. "Maybe we can get a little one instead," she murmured. Her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't upset, it was worse, it was accepting. As if this wasn't the first time life had told her no. As if she had learned already that wanting too much was dangerous. Michael felt something inside him collapse. He hated this, hated that her desires had already learned to shrink, hated that she was trying to make things easier for him. Parents were supposed to protect their children from heartbreak, not be the source of it. He wanted to grab the cake and slam his card on the counter, just to keep that look off her face. But Juan and reality were two very different things. He closed his wallet, his palms sweating. He opened his mouth to apologize again, but the words tangled in his throat. Before he could find them, Lily reached for his hand. "It's okay, Daddy," she said softly. "We can have cake next year." And that her absolute acceptance cut deeper than any judgment, any pity, any humiliation he'd ever felt. Because she meant it. Because she loved him anyway. Because she had learned too early that her father's love was big, but his money wasn't. In that moment, Michael would have given anything at all to change the world she lived in. He didn't know that someone behind him had heard everything. He didn't know that this moment, the one that made him feel the smallest, was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life, his daughter's life, and the life of a woman who thought she had everything until she saw a father trying his best in a world stacked against him. Caroline Sanders hadn't planned on being at the bakery that morning. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near downtown Seattle, let alone standing in line between two teenagers arguing over cake flavors and a father trying to pretend he wasn't counting the bills in his wallet. Her schedule said she should have been in a conference room overlooking Lake Union, preparing to present projections for Sanders Group's upcoming housing initiative. Instead, she had stepped out of her chauffered SUV 10 minutes earlier with a strange, restless urge to walk, something she hadn't done in years. Her assistant had stared at her like she'd announced she was retiring on the spot. But Caroline needed a break from polished glass towers, from boardrooms full of men who spoke to her like she was both a miracle and a problem, and from her own life that looked perfect on paper, but hollow in every place that mattered. So she walked, no security detail, no assistant trailing with an iPad, no driver hovering. Just her in a gray wool coat over a cashmere sweater, hair pulled back, blending in just enough for people to look past her without the usual flicker of recognition. She had stopped at the bakery only because the smell drifted out onto the sidewalk, warm vanilla, cinnamon, melting sugar. It reminded her of weekends she hadn't had in years. The ones where her mother wasn't scheduling etiquette lessons and her father wasn't reminding her that Sanders' children didn't waste time on hobbies that didn't serve their future. She'd stepped inside thinking maybe she'd buy a croissant, sit by the window, pretend for 5 minutes that she was simply another Seattle local enjoying a quiet morning. Then she heard it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a father murmuring to his daughter in a voice that strained at the edges. Caroline didn't turn right away. She was scrolling through an email she didn't want to answer, ignoring 3 missed calls from her brother Samuel, and trying not to think about the upcoming charity gala where she would inevitably run into her ex, Ryan Dalton, who would undoubtedly make some comment about her commitment to familial responsibility. But something in the man's voice made her look up. A little girl stood on her toes, breath fogging the glass as she stared at a cake covered in strawberries. Her hair fell in soft brown curls, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she pointed to the dessert like it was magic. Her father, tired eyes, rough hands, jacket stained from work, opened his wallet behind her. Caroline saw the thin stack of bills. She saw his shoulders tense. She saw the moment reality caught up to him. And even from 3 steps away, she saw the moment the little girl understood. The bakery had 36 conversations happening, machines whirring, music playing faintly overhead. But somehow everything else blurred as Caroline watched father and daughter navigate disappointment with a tenderness that struck her deeper than she expected. The man knelt quietly beside the girl and whispered something. The girl stepped back, small hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, and nodded with a heartbreaking maturity. Caroline felt her chest tighten. Kids weren't supposed to accept heartbreak that easily. Kids weren't supposed to look like disappointment was familiar. She wasn't sure when she moved closer. Maybe it was instinct, maybe empathy, maybe loneliness, but suddenly she found herself close enough to hear the girl whisper, "We can have cake next year, Daddy." The man closed his eyes for the shortest moment, like he was absorbing a blow. Caroline didn't know him, didn't know his story, didn't know how many nights he'd stayed awake trying to stretch the last dollars of his paycheck. She didn't know how many promises he'd made to himself about giving his daughter a better life. But she knew one thing immediately: no child should have to ration joy. Michael, she didn't know his name yet, stood up slowly, still shielding his daughter with one hand, as if trying to protect her from the humiliation he carried. Caroline felt something warm and sharp bloom in her chest. She'd grown up in a world where money smoothed over every inconvenience. Her parents solved problems with checks and contracts. Her world was glass elevators, black credit cards, and decisions discussed over wine that cost more than a month's rent in most neighborhoods. She had never gone without a birthday cake. She had never heard known a bakery, but she had felt unseen. She had felt like a burden. She had felt like her worth hinged on what she could offer, not who she was. And watching that little girl stare at a cake she couldn't have resurfaced something buried inside her, something tender and bruised. She took a step forward before she fully processed the decision. She just knew she couldn't stand there and do nothing. She cleared her throat lightly, drawing the father's attention. He turned startled, pulling his daughter subtly behind him, not out of fear, Caroline realized, but instinct. He looked at her like she was out of place, like he wasn't sure why someone dressed like her was speaking to him. She felt heat climb her neck but kept her voice steady. "Excuse me," she said, "I'd like to pay for the cake." His reaction was immediate, defensive, proud, wounded. He shook his head firmly. "No, thank you." But no, his refusal wasn't rude. If anything, it was painfully dignified. Caroline felt her heart twist. She lifted her hands gently, palms open, trying not to crowd him. "You'd be helping me," she lied softly. "I've been looking for an excuse to try that cake, but I can't eat the whole thing alone. Let me get it for her, please." The girl peered around her father's leg, eyes wide, hopeful but cautious. Caroline saw her hesitate, torn between desire and loyalty to her father's pride. Caroline softened her expression. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," the girl whispered. Caroline smiled. "Lily, would it be okay if we got your birthday cake today?" Lily looked up at her father, waiting for his permission, because to her, he was the final word on the world. And Caroline saw the moment his pride warred with his love. It lasted less than a heartbeat. He sighed, a sound of surrender and heartbreak and devotion. "Pick 2 small pastries," he murmured to Lily without looking at Caroline. "And say thank you." Lily nodded eagerly and pointed to 2 chocolate eclairs. Caroline smiled, turning to the cashier. "And the strawberry cake, please." She didn't reach for a credit card, she reached for the one no one ever missed, the black metal card she used for business expenses. The one her accountant always scolded her for underutilizing. The cashier blinked at the card, then at her, clearly recognizing the Sanders name embossed in silver. She pretended not to notice. But Caroline didn't miss the way the father stiffened, embarrassment washing over him. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. She had meant to help, but she could feel his humiliation rising like steam between them. She lowered her voice. "It's a gift for her," she said softly, "not for you, for her." That was the moment his expression changed, not acceptance, not comfort, but a weary kind of gratitude he didn't want to feel. Caroline didn't stay for praise. She didn't even stay long enough to watch them leave the store. She just offered the cake box to him gently and whispered, "Happy birthday, Lily." And then she stepped away, heart racing, because something about that father and daughter had shaken a part of her she didn't know was still fragile. She would think about them all day. She would think about them for weeks. She just didn't know yet that her life had shifted in those few minutes, that her worlds, wealth and wonder and loneliness, had collided with theirs in a way none of them could undo. Michael didn't understand why his chest felt tight as he carried the bakery box toward the door, Lily skipping beside him with her small eclairs clutched like treasure. Maybe it was the weight of accepting help he hadn't asked for. Maybe it was the sting of having a stranger witness a moment he wished no one had seen. Or maybe it was because something in the woman's eyes, Caroline, he later learned had unsettled him in a way he couldn't shake. She wasn't pitying, though pity would have been easier to dismiss. She wasn't smug or self-satisfied, the way wealthy customers sometimes were when they tipped big at the garage and called it generosity. Instead, she looked at him as if she recognized the quiet war he fought every day to give his daughter a life that didn't feel small, but recognition came with its own kind of discomfort. He didn't want to be seen that clearly, especially not by someone who walked through the world with resources he couldn't imagine. Outside, the Seattle drizzle had started, soft but steady, blurring the edges of cars and storefronts. Lily hopped around puddles with the reckless joy only preschoolers had, humming a birthday song out of tune. Michael watched her, feeling the warm ache he felt every time he realized she was growing up faster than he could catch up. She deserved magic. She deserved softness, and he hated that he couldn't give her more of it on his own. He adjusted the handle on the cake box, still feeling the woman's brief presence like a warmth lingering at his back. He had noticed her in line earlier, hard not to, with that sleek gray coat and the calm, controlled posture of someone used to commanding attention. But she hadn't seemed haughty. If anything, she had looked tired, like she was carrying something heavier than the expensive leather bag on her shoulder. He dismissed the thought. People like her live different lives, with different burdens. Burdens that didn't involve worrying about whether rent would clear or whether Lily's shoes would last until the next paycheck. But that didn't stop him from replaying the moment she stepped forward. Something about it unnerved him. Not because she bought the cake, but because she did it gently, quietly, without making a show of it. She hadn't looked at him like he was less. She hadn't looked away from his embarrassment. She had simply stepped in. He didn't want to think about her anymore. The day was supposed to be about Lily. They reached the bus stop, Michael shifting the cake carefully as Lily climbed onto the bench, swinging her little legs. He tried to focus on practical things: dinner prep, getting the apartment warmed up before guests came over, making sure he had candles, but his mind kept drifting back to the bakery. He wondered if the woman had regretted stepping in. Wealthy people sometimes did generous things impulsively, then immediately detached, forgetting the impact those gestures had on the people receiving them. But something told him this woman wasn't like that. There had been sincerity behind her eyes, a softness contrasted sharply with the polished executive exterior she wore. He exhaled slowly, trying to let the thought go, but Lily tugged his hand. "Daddy," she said through a mouthful of chocolate Claire, "the lady was really nice." Michael nodded, though he wasn't sure what he felt. "Yeah, she was. She looked like a princess," Lily added confidently. He snorted, "Maybe very stressed out princess." Lily giggled, then grew thoughtful. "Do you think she likes strawberries too?" That caught him off guard. The simplicity of the question, the innocence of it, made something in him loosen. "I think she might," he admitted. Lily smiled, satisfied with that answer, and leaned her head against his arm. Michael held still, cherishing the contact. He wished he could freeze the moment: Lily happy, the world quiet, the cake intact. These were the seconds he lived for, the ones that reminded him that even if life was hard, he had something worth every struggle. The bus arrived, brakes hissing against the wet pavement. Michael lifted Lily onto a seat, then sat beside her, balancing the cake on his knees. He caught sight of his reflection in the faintly scratched window, tired eyes, stubble he meant to shave, hair mussed from the drizzle. A father doing his best, even when it felt like his best was never enough. As the bus rumbled south toward Tacoma, he couldn't help thinking about how the entire moment in the bakery could have gone differently. He could be snapped, he could be refused angrily, pride flaring. He could be walked out carrying nothing but disappointment. Pride was a tricky thing, too much of it, and he risked becoming the kind of man who put ego above his child's happiness. Too little, and he risked losing the last threads of dignity he worked so hard to protect. But Lily's face when she saw the Claires, the genuine awe, the joy made the discomfort worth swallowing. And the truth was simple: the woman hadn't bought the cake for him. She bought it for Lily. He couldn't fault that. Still, he wished he didn't feel the sting of inadequacy so sharply. He closed his eyes briefly, listening to the rumble of the engine, the patter of rain against the windows, Lily humming softly. His mind flicked back to the woman's voice, steady, warm, offering help without judgment. He wondered what had compelled her to step in. Wealth alone didn't create compassion. He'd met wealthy people at the garage who treated him like a vending machine for repairs, never seeing the human behind the service. She hadn't been like that, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. When they reached their stop, Lily hopped down from the bus, boots splashing. Michael followed, adjusting the cake again. The air smelled of wet pavement and pine, the familiar scent of their neighborhood. Old houses, chain-link fences, peeling paint, kids' bikes lying on lawns. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. As they walked home, a few neighbors waved. Mrs. Harlow from 2B called out, "Birthday girl looks excited." Lily beamed, raising her Claires like trophies. Michael forced a smile, grateful for the community that patched the holes life left behind. Inside their small apartment, he set the cake on the counter carefully, almost reverently. The kitchen was cramped but warm, decorated with Lily's drawings taped crookedly on the fridge. Lily danced around the living room, singing her name into a pretend microphone made of a wooden spoon. Michael leaned against the counter, feeling the exhaustion of the morning settle into his bones, not just physical exhaustion, but emotional weight. The kind that pulled at him from the inside, reminding him how precarious everything was. He rubbed his forehead. He wanted to forget the way his heart had clenched when he opened his wallet. Forget the woman's eyes. Forget the feeling of being seen, really seen, in a moment when he felt his smallest. But some moments didn't let themselves be forgotten. He felt it lingering still, the ripple effect of kindness, unexpected and unsettling, moving quietly beneath the surface of his day. He didn't know yet that this ripple would become a wave, one strong enough to shift the course of his life. He didn't know her name, or that she would appear again. And he definitely didn't know that Lily, with her boundless heart, would be the thread that pulled their worlds together. All he knew as he watched his daughter twirl and laugh was that for the first time in weeks, The day didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the start of something he couldn't explain. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Something that already felt bigger than him. Caroline Sanders didn't expect to think about the man and his daughter for the rest of the day, but she did. It started as a passing thought as she stepped back into her SUV, tapping her fingers against the leather seat while her driver asked where she wanted to go next. She almost told him to take her home, but instead she stared out the window at the drizzle-soaked sidewalk and realized she had absolutely no desire to return to her penthos yet. Her mind kept drifting back to the bakery, the look in the man's eyes, the way he shielded his daughter, the way the little girl tried to comfort him instead of the other way around. It wasn't pity she felt. It was something much more complex, a mix of admiration, sorrow, and an ache she hadn't felt in years. She told her driver to take the long route to the office, though she had no reason to be there early. She simply needed space to think. As the car made its way along the waterfront, she leaned her head against the cool glass and let the city blur into streaks of gray and blue. Seattle was beautiful in the rain, even if most people complained about it. To Caroline, the rain softened everything, edges, expectations, even the parts of herself she usually kept locked away. She wondered if the man Michael, she guessed was home now. Wondered if the little girl Lily had tasted her Claire's yet. Wondered why she cared this much about strangers she would likely never see again. Her phone buzzed with notifications, Samuel asking where she was, her mother reminding her about the charity gala, a board member requesting a meeting. She ignored them all. Work normally consumed her, gave her identity and structure, but today she felt strangely detached. She had signed billion-dollar contracts without blinking, argued with executives twice her age without breaking composure. But one moment in a bakery had unraveled something she'd held together for years. She arrived at the Sanders Group's headquarters, a towering glass building downtown, and walked through the lobby as people greeted her with the usual mix of respect and intimidation. She nodded, entering the private elevator that whisked her to the top floors. But the moment she reached her office, she realized she didn't want to be there either. The polished surfaces, immaculate decor, and floor-to-ceiling windows that usually grounded her felt sterile today, like museum pieces curated for someone she no longer recognized. She set her purse down and sat at her desk, fingers tapping restlessly. She tried reviewing the project files for the new housing development, but her focus scattered. Every number blurred. Every paragraph slipped through her thoughts like water. Eventually she leaned back and closed her eyes, rubbing her temples, trying to steady herself. She hadn't expected the bakery encounter to affect her this deeply. Maybe it was because she had grown up in a world where children were shielded from discomfort, where birthday cakes appeared without question and presents filled entire rooms. Maybe it was because she had spent her whole life surrounded by abundance, yet felt emotionally starved. Or maybe it was because there had been a familiarity in Lily's eyes, a kind of quiet resilience Caroline remembered having as a child, despite being raised in privilege. A resilience born from loneliness, not hardship. Her childhood had been filled with lessons, expectations, and rules, but not warmth. Her parents showed affection through achievement, not intimacy. She performed, excelled, achieved, and was rewarded with approval but never with closeness. And now, watching a father who had almost nothing pour all of himself into his daughter with a gentleness she'd never known, something inside her cracked open. With a sigh, she stood and walked toward the window, gazing down at the city. Small silhouettes hurried along sidewalks, umbrellas blooming like black flowers. She wondered where the father worked. His jacket had been stained with what looked like engine grease. He'd had calloused hands, strong arms, a tired stance, someone accustomed to physical labor. She imagined him in a dimly lit auto shop somewhere in Tacoma, working long hours while Lily colored in the corner or watched cartoons on a small tablet. She shouldn't be imagining these things. She didn't know him. She shouldn't be picturing the life of a stranger with such clarity, but she couldn't seem to stop. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her assistant Emily requesting a meeting with the legal team. Caroline stared at the screen, thinking. She needed something to distract her. Something that wasn't emotional, unpredictable, or connected to a little girl's birthday cake. But her mind refused to cooperate. Eventually she sat again and opened her laptop, trying to bury herself in corporate tasks. She reviewed financial projections, approved marketing drafts, and skimmed proposals, tasks that normally consumed her fully. But today her efficiency was sluggish, as if her heart wasn't participating. Instead of signing documents, she found herself typing Tacoma Auto Shops into the search bar, then caught herself and slammed the laptop shut. What was she doing? She exhaled sharply, leaning back. She didn't want to intrude on the man's privacy. She didn't want to track down strangers out of some misguided attempt to feel connected. Her gesture at the bakery had been simple kindness, not an invitation, not an obligation. She had no right to cross the invisible boundary that separated their worlds. Yet as she rose from her desk and paced the office, she realized something deeply unsettling. She didn't want this to be the end of their story. Despite logic, caution, and every warning bell of propriety, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had glimpsed something rare. A father's love so pure and unfiltered it felt like sunlight breaking into a room that had been dark for too long. By late afternoon, she gave up pretending to work. She grabbed her coat, ignoring the surprised look from her assistant when she said she was leaving early. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, bouncing off the pavement in shimmering arcs. She walked instead of calling her driver, letting the water soak into her coat, letting her thoughts drift freely without the constraints of professionalism. Her steps eventually slowed as she passed a small park. Children splashed in puddles while their exhausted parents yelled warnings. Caroline stood at the edge of the sidewalk watching them, thinking about Lily, wondering if she was the type to jump into puddles or if she preferred drawing and singing. She imagined Michael lifting her onto his shoulders, her laughter echoing against the gray sky, and the thought warmed her in a way that startled her. For someone who had spent her life surrounded by excess, she had never known simplicity, never known a love not tied to expectation, and the longer she stood in the rain, the more she realized the truth. She envied them. Not their circumstance, not their struggle, but their connection. Their small, imperfect, beautiful world felt richer than anything money had ever given her. As she resumed walking, she whispered something she didn't fully understand yet, something that would shape the rest of her choices. I hope I see them again. She didn't know how or why or when. But the feeling lingered with her long after the rain eased, long after she returned to her penthos, long after she tried to distract herself with tasks that no longer anchored her. And though she didn't realize it yet, fate had already decided that the bakery was only the beginning. Michael had always believed that a man's dignity was something he had to protect, especially when life constantly tried to strip it away. So when he got home that afternoon with a bakery box in one hand and Lily's warm little fingers wrapped around the other, the weight of what had happened kept pressing on his ribs long after the drizzle dried from their jackets. He placed the cake on their kitchen counter, brushed crumbs from Lily's cheek, and tried to push the memory of the woman's black credit card out of his mind. He didn't want to owe anyone anything, least of all a stranger who walked through the world with the kind of ease he couldn't fathom. After setting Lily up with crayons and paper, Michael stepped into the bedroom he shared with her. The space was small and cluttered, a dresser with missing knobs, a lamp with peeling paint, and a single twin bed Lily insisted they share because she didn't like sleeping alone. He knelt and pulled a metal lockbox from beneath the bed. Inside were papers, spare keys, a few folded photographs, and an envelope filled with cash he had saved dollar by dollar. Not much, but it was something. He stared at it, the edges worn from years of opening and closing, counting and recounting. This was the fund for emergencies, for the unpredictable storms of life: car repairs, medical bills, unexpected expenses. Buying a cake had never made the list. He wasn't angry at the woman. If anything, he respected the gentleness in the way she offered help. She hadn't meant to embarrass him. But embarrassment didn't require intention. It simply grew from the parts of himself he tried to hide. He counted the cash again, $43, not even close to the cost of that cake. But the gesture he had promised himself mattered. If he accepted help, he would repay it, eventually, even if it took time. He looked at the box again and sighed. He knew what he had to do. The next morning he would go downtown, find the bakery employee, find the receipt, find a way to repay at least part of the cost. It wouldn't be much, but it would mean something to him, his own way of reclaiming control over a moment that had made him feel powerless. Later, while Lily napped curled against him, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt like she always did, Michael lay awake thinking about the woman. He didn't want to, but the expression in her eyes, soft, almost aching, stuck with him. People with wealth often looked at him with impatience or dismissal. She hadn't. She had looked at him like she saw something familiar, something she understood, that unsettled him more than the gesture itself. The next morning, the sky stretched gray over Tacoma, the kind of muted light that felt neither welcoming nor harsh. Michael dropped Lily off at press school, reassuring her 3 times that he would be back before afternoon story time. He then boarded the bus downtown, the city passing by in a blur of coffee shops and office buildings. His thoughts were tangled, but his purpose was clear: repay at least part of what the woman had spent. Inside the bakery, the same employee from the day before recognized him instantly. A mixture of surprise and sympathy flickered across the young man's face, which made Michael stiffen. He hated being pitied. He cleared his throat and handed over the envelope. "I need to return this," he said. "The woman who bought that cake yesterday, can you give this to her?" The employee hesitated. I'm not sure I can." "Please." Michael pushed the envelope closer. "It's important." The employee finally nodded, though he looked unsure. "I'll try to get it to her." Michael thanked him and left quickly. The encounter felt awkward, but necessary. It didn't matter if the envelope reached her today or next week. What mattered was that he had done what he could. Except he hadn't. That realization hit him halfway down the block. He didn't know her name. Didn't know where she worked or how to find her again. He hadn't even thanked her properly in the moment. Shame crawled up his spine. He felt like someone who'd handled everything wrong, accepting help he didn't want, returning money he couldn't afford to lose, and not even having the decency to acknowledge the stranger's kindness with anything more than a strained nod. He walked aimlessly for several minutes, the city loud around him, but all he heard were his thoughts. He felt unmoored, vulnerable, not feelings he allowed himself often. When he finally returned to the garage, the familiar smell of oil and metal grounded him. Don Esteban, the shop owner, raised a brow when Michael arrived earlier than usual. "You look like a man carrying too much in his head," Don Esteban said, tapping ash from his cigarette. "Just a busy morning," Michael muttered. But the older man had known him since he was 18. He saw through the lie instantly. Michael tried to lose himself in work, changing filters, balancing tires, diagnosing a Honda that had been rattling for 2 months, but he kept thinking about the bakery woman. He felt an uncomfortable tug in his chest every time her face flashed through his mind. Why did she stick with him like this? The answer came quietly, because she had seen him at his most vulnerable, and instead of looking away, she stepped toward him. Because she didn't treat him like an inconvenience or a charity case. She treated him like a person, and that scared him more than anything. When lunchtime came, he sat outside on an overturned crate, eating a sandwich he barely tasted. A thought crept in, one he tried to shake off, but it lingered stubbornly. Would she ever think about him again? He doubted it. People like her lived in fast-moving worlds. The moment in the bakery probably didn't mean anything to her beyond a good deed. She had done her part and moved on. That was what wealthy people did. He should move on too. But as he stared at the street, watching traffic crawl by under the hazy Seattle sky, he couldn't help the feeling blooming quietly beneath the surface. He hoped irrationally that their paths would cross again. Not because he owed her, not because he felt humiliated, but because for a few fleeting minutes in that bakery, someone had looked at him with a kind of understanding he hadn't felt in years. Someone who seemed to carry their own invisible weight. Someone who, despite everything, had noticed him. And that unexpected, unwelcome, undeniable was something he couldn't forget. Caroline hadn't expected the ache in her chest to return so sharply when she entered her penthos that night. The lights flicked on automatically, soft, warm, curated to give the illusion of comfort, and yet the space felt colder than the Seattle rain outside. Her penthos was immaculate, expensive, filled with modern art and furniture that interior designers insisted would create relaxed elegance. But there was nothing relaxing about a place where she spent most nights working instead of living. The moment she shut the door behind her, she exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding all day. She set her bag down, slipped off her heels, and walked barefoot through the massive living room, past the minimalist sofa she rarely sat on, past the kitchen island she never cooked at, past the rows of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering skyline. It was beautiful. It was impressive. It was the kind of home people envied, and she had never felt more disconnected from it. Her mind kept drifting back to the bakery, not just to Lily's small, hopeful voice, but to her father's expression, protective, conflicted, proud, and exhausted all at once. There had been something raw in the way he shielded his daughter, something deeply human that contrasted sharply with the polished world Caroline lived in. She kept replaying the moment his jaw tightened when she paid for the cake. The embarrassment on his face had hit her with unexpected force. She knew what it was like to feel exposed, though her vulnerability came from different origins. She knew what it meant to hold yourself together, because falling apart wasn't an option. She tried distracting herself, opened her laptop, scanned through emails, reviewed several proposals for upcoming projects, but words refused to stick. They bounced around her thoughts like clutter she didn't have the energy to sort through. She shut the laptop again. The penthos was too quiet, too spacious, too empty. It was the sort of emptiness that made the smallest thoughts echo in her mind. She walked into the guest room unused, pristine, decorated in soft blues that designers claimed created soothing energy. She sat on the edge of the bed and let her gaze wander over the large framed art piece on the wall. She remembered buying it at her mother's insistence because no Sanders home should have bare walls. She remembered signing the purchase contract without hesitation. She remembered feeling absolutely nothing. She pressed her palms to her eyes and let out a long breath. She hadn't felt so unmoored in years. After a moment, she stood and went to the kitchen. She made tea more out of restlessness than desire. She wasn't even sure she liked tea, but she needed something to do with her hands. She grabbed a mug, boiled water, and leaned against the counter while steam rose in soft spirals. She didn't even know the man's name. That thought struck her harder than expected. She knew his daughter's name, Lily. It was a sweet, simple name that matched the little girl's gentle demeanor. But the father, nothing, no name, no clue. Just a face she remembered too clearly and an ache she couldn't explain. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her mood sink. Ryan Dalton. She let it go to voicemail. Moments later, another text from her brother. Mom wants you at dinner tomorrow. Don't be late, we need to discuss the merger. The pressure was immediate, familiar, suffocating. She threw the phone onto the couch, frustrated. Her thoughts returned to Michael, not consciously, but the way someone returns to a memory that refuses to fade. She imagined him at home with his daughter, probably sitting on a worn couch, probably lighting candles on the strawberry cake she had bought, probably smiling through exhaustion because fathers like him had to be both soft and strong at the same time. She envied that kind of life more than she wanted to admit. Not the struggle, not the paycheck-to-paycheck reality, but the closeness. The feeling of belonging to someone. The simple joy of sharing cake at a cluttered kitchen table with laughter echoing through a home that might not be perfect but was real. Her penthouse echoed with nothing. She sipped her tea, though it had cooled, and wandered into her office. Her desk was scattered with project maps, investor notes, and meeting agendas. At the center was a folder for the Sanders Housing Initiative, a project she had once been passionate about. It involved revitalizing low-income neighborhoods, expanding affordable housing, improving community infrastructure, work she believed mattered. But the board only saw numbers and returns, not lives or families. That difference had begun to wear at her. She traced her finger along the edges of the folder. For a brief moment, she imagined a father like Michael living in one of the homes her company built, safe, clean, affordable. She imagined Lily playing in community gardens instead of cramped apartments. She imagined projects that uplifted people rather than making investors richer. She hadn't felt inspired by her work in years. The realization pierced her unexpectedly. She shut the folder and stepped away. She needed something else, something grounding. She grabbed her coat and walked out onto her balcony. The night air was crisp, smelling faintly of wet concrete and pine. The city stretched before her, lights shimmering across Elliott Bay. Cars glided down the viaduct, ferries cut through dark waters. It was a breathtaking view. And she had no one to share it with. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. The cool air cleared her mind enough for a single, stubborn resolution to form. She wanted to see them again. Not intrude, not interfere. Just to know that they were okay, to understand why one brief encounter had shaken her so deeply. She went back inside, grabbed her phone again, and stared at the blank search bar for several seconds before typing bakery Seidel father-daughter strawberry cake. Nothing, of course. She tried again with variations, still nothing. She didn't know why she was searching. Rationally, she knew it was pointless. Emotionally, she couldn't help herself. Eventually, she shut off the phone and set it aside. She curled onto her couch, an expensive couch that had never once felt comfortable, and pulled a throw blanket over her legs. She was tired, but not the kind of tired sleep could fix. She was restless, but not the kind activity could solve. The truth arrived softly but undeniably. This wasn't about a cake. It wasn't about pity or charity. It was about the way that moment in the bakery made her feel awake, aware, unsettled, moved. It was about a father's love she didn't understand but longed for. It was about a little girl's resilience that mirrored something she used to carry. It was about the fragile human connection she hadn't realized she was starving for. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep on the couch, one final thought lingered with her. If fate allowed it, she hoped their paths would cross again. She didn't know that fate was already working on it. Caroline woke the next morning with a sore neck, curled up awkwardly on her couch, her laptop still open on the coffee table. For a moment, she didn't remember falling asleep there. The penthouse was still dim, early sunlight filtered through the rain clouds and cast a muted glow into the room. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and the first thought that drifted into her mind wasn't work, or the upcoming board meeting, or the never-ending string of corporate obligations. It was Michael and Lily. An unexpected heaviness settled in her chest as she wondered what their morning looked like. She imagined Lily chattering through breakfast, excited about her birthday, and Michael trying to hurry her along while keeping everything together with the tired efficiency of a single parent. That image lingered with her as she got ready for the day. She showered, put on a tailored navy dress, tied her hair back, and applied makeup with automatic precision. But her thoughts kept circling back to the man with the wary eyes and the girl with a heart-shaped smile. Downstairs in the lobby, her driver greeted her, but she waved him off. "I'll walk today." The driver blinked, confused, but nodded. It wasn't that she wanted exercise as she wanted air, the kind of air that didn't come from recirculated vents or chauffeured back seats. She stepped into the drizzle and started down the sidewalk with no immediate destination. The bakery wasn't far, though she told herself she wasn't walking there on purpose. She was just nearby, passing by. Still, her heartbeat quickened when she recognized the block. Through the window, she could see customers lined up for morning pastries. Her gaze scanned the room automatically, searching for faces she knew she wouldn't find. She didn't expect Michael or Lily to be there. She didn't even know why she was looking. She started to turn away, but the barista inside noticed her and waved, recognizing her from yesterday. Caroline felt her face warm and quickly crossed the street as though she hadn't seen him. She felt foolish. She wasn't the type to obsess over strangers. She barely had time to maintain friendships, let alone dwell on chance encounters. And yet something about that moment in the bakery clung to her like a memory she wasn't ready to let go of. She walked another block before her phone buzzed. "Samuel. Meeting conference room 2 now." Her stomach tightened. She pivoted toward the corporate district and quickened her pace. By the time she took the elevator to the 12th floor, she had forced her expression into the calm, composed mask she was known for. Inside, the board members were already seated along with Samuel and her mother. Her mother, elegant in a pearl suit and sharp expression, gave her a pointed look. "You relate," her mother said. Caroline didn't react. The meeting wasn't scheduled. "That doesn't excuse tardiness," her mother replied coolly. This was how every conversation with her mother began: correction, criticism, control. Caroline took her seat. Samuel clicked the remote, bringing up a presentation about the merger between Sanders Group and Dalton Enterprises, Ryan's company. Caroline felt irritation flare. "This merger ensures stability," Samuel explained. "It strengthens our real estate footprint, expands market share, and binds us to a company with a history of predatory development." Caroline cut in. Several board members stiffened. Her mother narrowed her eyes. "Caroline," Samuel said through clenched teeth, "this is a strategic decision." "It's corporate cannibalism," she replied. "They eat up housing markets, inflate prices, and leave communities worse off. We should not align with that." Her mother leaned forward. "You know very well this merger benefits you, benefits your future." There it was, the implication beneath every career move. Her role wasn't about leadership, it was about legacy. About protecting the Sanders name. About shaping her into the perfect daughter who followed the perfect path. Caroline straightened her back. "I won't sign off on it." A cold hush swept the room. Her mother's voice dropped. "You are letting personal issues cloud your judgment." Caroline felt heat rise under her collar. If they only knew her personal issues were about human beings, not profit margins. Faces like Lily's. Stories like Michael's. "I'm thinking about the families who live in the homes we build," she said. "Not the people who buy our stock." Samuel scoffed. "Since when do you care about families?" Something inside her snapped at that question, not because it was accusatory, but because it was revealing. Her family had never understood care in the way she desperately longed for it to mean. She stood. "I'm not approving this, that's final." Her mother's tone was ice. "You will fall in line, Caroline. Or you will fall." Caroline met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll fall." She walked out, leaving the room stunned. In the hallway she exhaled shakily. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. The confrontation had drained her, but beneath the exhaustion was something else, a quiet certainty she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't wrong, she wasn't irrational. She was finally doing something aligned with who she wanted to be, not who she was raised to become. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the ground floor button, and leaned against the mirrored wall. Her reflection stared back, smooth hair, polished dress, poised posture, but the eyes looked tired, not from work, from emptiness. When she exited the building, the drizzle had softened into a mist that clung to everything like a delicate veil. Instead of heading back toward her penthouse, she found herself drifting down the street, walking without thinking, pulled by something she couldn't name. Eventually she ended up at a small playground tucked between apartment buildings. Children shrieked with laughter. Parents chatted on benches. Caroline stood at the edge, watching quietly. A little girl in a yellow raincoat ran by, and for a fleeting moment the resemblance to Lily struck her so sharply she inhaled. She wasn't losing her mind, was she? No, she was longing. Longing for something real, something grounded, something she had never allowed herself to want: connection. She sat on a bench, letting the sounds of children fill the space around her. A boy fell, then laughed. A mother wiped mud off her toddler's cheek. Ordinary moments, imperfect moments. Life happening in all its messy beauty. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look. Instead, she whispered to herself, "There has to be more than this." And maybe somewhere in Tacoma there was. A father who loved fiercely. A daughter who trusted completely. A moment in a bakery that hadn't let her go. As clouds parted briefly and a streak of sunlight warmed her face, one truth settled gently in her chest. She wasn't done with them. And something deep down told her. They weren't done with her. Michael returned home from work that evening with the kind of bone, deep exhaustion he'd grown used to over the years. The garage had been slammed with back-to-back repairs, all-day brake jobs, oil changes, an engine diagnostic that took far too long, and though he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting back to the envelope he had left at the bakery. He wondered if the employee actually gave it to her. He wondered if she had opened it or if she had just tossed it aside, confused about why a stranger would repay money she didn't need. But more than anything, he wondered why it mattered to him so much. He hung his jacket by the door, loosened his boots, and stepped into the small living room. Lily was curled up on the couch watching a cartoon, her curls bouncing with every laugh. The sight eased his tension instantly. She jumped off the couch and wrapped her arms around his waist. Her tiny voice muffled into his shirt as she declared she'd been waiting forever. Michael scooped her up and kissed the top of her head, grateful for the familiarity of her warmth. As she chattered about her day at preschool, he listened with genuine attention because Lily was one of the few things in the world that made him forget his exhaustion. Eventually, she ran off to her room to fetch drawings she wanted to show him, leaving Michael alone long enough for his thoughts to drift back to the woman he couldn't seem to stop thinking about. There was no reason she should have stayed in his mind. People came and went in city life all the time. But she had done something he wasn't used to. She had looked at him without judgment. That expression, soft but searching, kept replaying in his head like a song he couldn't unhear. He didn't understand why it unsettled him. He didn't have time for strangers. His life revolved around Lily, the garage, and surviving each month's bills. Emotional complications were a luxury he couldn't afford. Still, her face lingered everywhere he turned. When he set plates on the small kitchen table, he thought of the expensive jewelry she'd worn. When he washed his hands, he remembered how she had tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. When he opened the fridge, he remembered her voice, gentle, steady, almost apologetic. He didn't even know her name. That should have been the end of the thought, but instead it became an anchor that held his attention longer than he liked. After dinner, while Lily colored with crayons on the living room rug, Michael sat at the small table trying to calculate which bills he could postpone to cover the rent increase. He scribbled numbers, crossed them out, and tried again, frustration building with each line. His head drooped into his hands. He was tired of stretching pennies. He was tired of worrying every month. He was tired of pretending it didn't wear him down. Lily softly patted over and leaned her head on his arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "you rethinking too much." He smiled despite himself and kissed her forehead. "I guess I am." She studied him with the kind of wisdom that always surprised him. "It's okay, the lady helped us. Maybe good things are coming." Her words hit deeper than she knew. He didn't want Lily believing that good things depended on strangers stepping in. He wanted her to believe good things came from hard work, resilience, and honesty. But she wasn't wrong either. Sometimes the world was harsh. Sometimes people needed each other. Sometimes help wasn't charity, it was kindness. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep curled against him, Michael lay awake staring at the ceiling. His mind returned to the envelope he had left behind. He wondered what she would think when she saw it. Would she laugh? Would she toss it aside? She think he was ungrateful? No, she didn't seem like someone who dismissed sincerity. She had felt genuine. And that, oddly enough, made him restless. The next morning he woke earlier than usual, the sky still dark. He got Lily ready for school, braided her hair as best he could, and walked her to the bus stop with her small hand swinging in his. After dropping her off, he almost headed straight to work. Almost. Instead, he hesitated at the corner. The bakery wasn't far. Something pulled him in that direction. Not hope exactly, but closure. Maybe if he checked in, maybe if he confirmed she had received the envelope, maybe if he could be sure the encounter was finished, he could move on and let the whole thing fade into memory. So he boarded the bus headed back into Seattle. The morning drizzle misted the windows as he leaned back in his seat, trying to ignore the nervous thrum beneath his ribs. At the bakery, the bell chimed overhead when he stepped inside. The same barista straightened at the sight of him. "Hey," the young man said. "I've been meaning to tell you she came back." Michael froze. "She did?" "Yesterday afternoon," the barista said. "She asked about you." Michael's pulse stumbled. "About me?" The barista nodded. "Wanted to know if you left your name, or a number." Michael felt the air shift around him. She had come back for what? To return the envelope, to refuse the repayment. to demand an explanation. None of it made sense. Did you tell her anything? He asked quietly. The barista shook his head. Didn't have anything to tell her. I gave her the envelope, though. She looked surprised. She didn't say much after that. Michael exhaled slowly, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline coursing through him. She had returned. She had asked about him. She had taken the envelope. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know what she thought of him. But something in his chest felt lighter, maybe because she had cared enough to return at all. As he left the bakery, the morning clouds parted just enough for a sliver of sunlight to break through. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and walked toward the bus stop, feeling unsettled yet strangely hopeful. And while he didn't know it yet, Caroline had left the bakery the previous day holding the envelope with a look he couldn't have imagined, one of curiosity, one of empathy, and one that suggested she wasn't ready for their story to end either. By the time Caroline reached her office that afternoon, she had already opened Michael's envelope 3 separate times, each time staring at the bills inside like they were speaking a language she hadn't mastered. $80, folded carefully, pressed flat, clean despite the wear. She knew instantly what it was: his attempt to return the money for the cake. A repayment he didn't owe her, a repayment he couldn't afford. A repayment that made something inside her constrict with an emotion she couldn't fully name. Gratitude, sadness, respect, maybe all 3. She carried the envelope up to the 23rd floor, tucked into her coat like something fragile, something that didn't belong in a world of polished floors and glass conference rooms. As she stepped out of the elevator, she saw employees glance at her, then at the envelope, curiosity flickering in their eyes. But no one dared ask. Caroline was good at keeping people at a distance. Today, however, she felt the distance more sharply than usual. She slipped into her office and closed the door. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. She set it on her desk, touched the edges lightly, then dropped into her chair with a slow exhale. She wasn't sure why she couldn't let this go. Random acts of kindness happened in cities every day, sometimes large, sometimes small, often forgotten. But this one refused to fade. Maybe because of Lily's little voice, maybe because of Michael's eyes. Maybe because she had seen something in that moment that mirrored her own longing. She opened the envelope again. The bills were folded with a precision that spoke of careful budgeting and pride. And tucked behind the bills was a small note she hadn't noticed before. Thank you. For her. No name, just those 4 words. 4 words that hit harder than any boardroom critique her family had ever thrown at her. She knew instantly that this wasn't about the money. It was about dignity. It was about a man doing everything he could to maintain the one thing the world kept trying to take from him. She closed her eyes, pressing the note between her fingers. She had spent her whole life surrounded by wealth, privilege, excess, and yet she had never seen a gesture more sincere than this crumpled envelope with a handwritten thank you. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at the Seattle skyline stretching out beneath the storm clouds. She felt an ache deep in her chest, a pull towards something she didn't understand but desperately wanted to explore. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Emily, her assistant, peeked in. Caroline, your mother wants to confirm dinner tonight. Caroline straightened, pushing the envelope aside. Cancel it. Emily blinked. Cancel with your mother? Yes. She's not going to like that, I'm aware. Emily hesitated. Should I give a reason? Caroline looked at the envelope again. Tell her I have something important to take care of. Emily nodded slowly, sensing this wasn't a negotiation. When the door shut again, Caroline picked up the envelope once more. Something important. The words lingered in her mind, echoing louder than they should. She wasn't impulsive. She had never been impulsive. Her life was structured, predictable, disciplined, every move planned, every decision weighed, every emotion contained. But right now, impulsiveness felt like the most honest thing she could choose. She grabbed her coat, slipped the envelope into her purse, and left the office, ignoring the startled looks from employees who weren't used to seeing her leave early 2 days in a row. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist that clung to her hair. She raised her hand to hail a cab, hesitated, and then shook her head. A cab didn't feel right. Instead, she boarded a bus, the same one she imagined Michael taking, and sat near the back, her coat still damp. People bustled around her, talking on phones, juggling grocery bag, arguing with toddlers, living lives messy and real. For once, Caroline didn't feel out of place. She felt human. As the bus rolled toward Tacoma, she held the envelope in her lap, tracing the edges again and again. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She only knew she needed to return it, not the money, but something else. Acknowledgement. Respect, connection. She reached the neighborhood. She remembered modest apartments, aging sidewalks, chain link fences. She stepped off the bus and breathed in the scent of wet pavement and cedar. It was so different from her world, yet not unwelcoming. She walked slowly, taking in every detail: kids riding bikes, a dog barking behind a fence, a woman watering plants in mismatched pots. The kind of lived-in life she had never known. She found the apartment building Michael and Lily lived in not because she had memorized it, but because she recognized the small drawings taped to a window, the kind a little girl would proudly display. She hesitated at the door. This was crossing a line. This was more than returning an envelope. This was stepping into someone's life uninvited. She took a breath, raised her hand to knock. Then the door opened from the inside. Lily stepped out first, wearing a backpack almost as big as she was. She froze when she saw Caroline. Her eyes widened. "It's you," she squeaked, her voice bursting with surprise and excitement. Michael appeared behind her, keys in hand, ready to lock the door. When he saw Caroline standing there in her tailored coat with rain still clinging to her hair, he stopped mid-motion. His eyes flickered with confusion, tension, and something else, something cautious but not unkind. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice steady but guarded. Caroline swallowed, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. She held out the envelope. "I came to return this." "You didn't have to." "I did," Michael interrupted gently. "I meant to." "I know," she said softly, "and that's why I'm here." They stood in the doorway, the drizzle softening the world around them. Lily looked between them, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered loudly, "she found us." Michael sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "We on our way out," he said. "Lily has press school." Caroline nodded, clutching the envelope. "I don't want to take your time. I just didn't feel right keeping this. Not when you need it more than I ever will." His expression tightened, but not in anger, more in discomfort. "It's not about need," he said. "It's about doing what's right." She held his gaze. "Then let me do what's right too." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Lily tugged on Michael's sleeve. "Daddy, can she come with us?" Michael opened his mouth to protest. But then he met Caroline's eyes again, eyes that weren't cold or judging, but hopeful, maybe even nervous, and something in him softened. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, he simply breathed out slowly, and that hesitation was enough to shift everything. Caroline smiled, a small, warm, uncertain smile that felt like the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. "Maybe another day," she said gently to Lily, but her eyes were still on Michael. "If that's okay." Michael didn't know how to answer, but for the first time since the bakery he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt seen, and strangely understood. As they stepped out into the gray Seattle morning, Michael guiding Lily, Caroline standing just a few feet away, the air between them felt charged with something new. Something fragile, something possible. And none of them realized it yet, but this small, hesitant moment would soon become the turning point of everything that followed. The charity gala was one of those events Michael had only ever seen on television: lavish decorations, glittering chandeliers, people dressed in tuxedos and gowns that cost more than his yearly rent. When the invitation arrived through an unexpected phone call from Caroline, he almost said no without thinking. It wasn't his world. It wasn't a place for a single father who spent his days covered in engine grease. But Caroline's voice had held something, an earnest plea wrapped in uncertainty that made it impossible to refuse. She had said Lily would love it. She had said it was just a community event, nothing formal, nothing overwhelming. That had been a lie. A gentle lie, but a lie nonetheless. When Michael stepped through the doors of the Grand Hotel ballroom with Lily's hand in his, the dazzling lights nearly blinded him. Women in sparkling gowns turned their heads. Men in tailored suits lifted their brows. Conversations shifted subtly as they passed. Lily, however, didn't notice any of it. She gasped in delight at the tall ice sculpture shaped like a cascading fountain and squeezed Michael's hand excitedly. "Daddy, look! It's like a fairy castle." And then, before he could react, Caroline appeared. She looked breathtaking, hair swept back, wearing a gown in deep emerald that complemented her eyes in a way that made Michael momentarily forget how to breathe. She didn't look like the woman who had bought a birthday cake in a Seattle bakery. She looked like someone who belonged on magazine covers. But the way her face lit up when she saw them, that warmth was undeniably real. She knelt gracefully to Lily's level. "You made it," she said, smiling. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy said we can stay until my bedtime." "Then we better make the most of it," Caroline replied, rising to meet Michael's eyes. "Thank you for coming." He cleared his throat. "You didn't tell me it was this kind of event." "If I had," she admitted softly, "you wouldn't have come." He couldn't argue with that. People around them whispered, subtle but unmistakable. Caroline Sanders, Seattle's most eligible corporate heiress, walking over to greet a man in worn dress shoes and an off-the-rack suit. It was a spectacle no one knew what to do with. Michael felt the weight of every stare. His jaw tightened. He hated attention. Hated the way people's eyes slid over him, measuring him, judging him. But every time he looked at Lily's radiant smile, some of the tension eased. As long as she was happy, he could endure anything. Caroline led them to a quieter corner where the music was softer and the crowd thinner. "I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed," she said, voice low. "Too late," he replied, though there was a faint smile pulling at his lips. She laughed lightly, an unguarded laugh he hadn't heard before. "Just stay close to me, no one here will bother you if you with me." Something about the way she said it stirred something in his chest, something he didn't want to name. For the next half hour, Lily became the star of the evening. She tugged Caroline around the ballroom, marveling at everything from the flower arrangements to the chocolate fountain. Caroline followed her with the patience of someone who'd spent years longing to care for someone but never had the chance. Meanwhile, Michael observed from a few steps behind, watching the two of them move together with a familiarity that startled him. They fit. He hadn't expected that, he hadn't expected any of this. But the moment of calm didn't last. People began to approach them, first a couple with overly bright smiles, then a man with a camera, then a cluster of reporters who had been hovering by the bar. The murmurs grew louder. Is she dating him? Who is he? He's definitely not from her circle. Is she doing some kind of charity feature? Michael felt his stomach twist. He didn't belong here. And it didn't matter how kind Caroline was, this room would never let him forget it. Things escalated when a reporter stepped directly in front of them, blocking their path. "Ms. Sanders," she said sharply, "care to comment on your mystery guest tonight? Is this a new philanthropic initiative, a mentorship program, or something more personal?" Michael stiffened. Lily clung to his leg. Caroline's expression hardened instantly, a spark of fire igniting behind her eyes. "That's none of your business," Caroline said coolly. "Please step aside." But the reporter didn't budge. "Seattle would love to know why the CEO of Sanders Group is escorting a mechanic from Tacoma to a black tie event." The word mechanic wasn't said with respect. It was said like something scraped off the bottom of an expensive shoe. Michael's fists clenched, heat rose in his throat. For a moment he considered walking out, dragging Lily with him, leaving this entire glittering nightmare behind. But before he could speak, Caroline stepped forward, placing her body squarely between the reporter and Michael. "He's here," she said, voice sharp enough to cut glass, "because I invited him. And that is all you need to know." Her tone silenced several people nearby. But the damage was done. Michael saw camera flashes, saw heads turning, saw Lily shrinking closer to him, scared. A protective fury surged through him. He picked her up, holding her tightly. His voice when he spoke was low and rough. "We leaving?" Caroline's face fell, but she didn't try to stop him. She simply nodded, hurt flickering across her features as she walked them toward the exit. Outside, the cool night air slapped Michael's skin, grounding him. Lily pressed her cheek to his shoulder, trembling. He kissed her head, whispering reassurances until her breathing steadied. Caroline stepped beside him, hugging her arms around herself, the evening wind catching her hair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think they'd react like that." "You should have," he said softly, not out of anger but truth. "This is your world, and I don't fit in it." "That's not what I believe," she replied, voice quiet but firm. "Maybe not," he said, "but everyone in that room does." The words hit her visibly. Lily lifted her head. "Miss Caroline, I liked the castle fountain." Caroline managed a warm, though fragile smile. "I'm glad you did, sweetheart." Michael shifted her gently. "We should go. It's late." Caroline nodded, but something inside her resisted letting the moment end there. "Michael," she said softly, "I invited you because I wanted you there. Both of you. I wanted you to see a part of my life. I didn't expect it to hurt you." He met her eyes. "It didn't hurt me." He paused. "It hurt her." Caroline looked at Lily, guilt rippling through her. Michael turned away, unsure if he was making the right decision, but certain he couldn't let Lily be overwhelmed another minute. As he walked off into the night, Caroline stood frozen on the steps of the ballroom, the sounds of the gala fading behind her. She watched the father and daughter disappear into the crowd, swallowed by the city lights. Her chest ached with something she didn't want to name, something she wasn't ready for, the crushing realization that her world, for all its beauty and power, had no idea how to hold people gently, and for the first time in years, she wished she belonged somewhere else. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere they were. News of the gala spread faster than either Michael or Caroline expected. By the next morning, articles appeared online with headlines like "Sanders' hair spotted with mystery mechanic" and "Caroline Sanders' unexpected gala companion raises eyebrows." Photos of Caroline standing beside Michael, her elegant gown contrasting sharply with his modest suit, circulated across social media with commentary ranging from snide amusement to outright mockery. Caroline had woken to dozens of missed calls and a barrage of texts from board members, family members, journalists, and acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years. But the message that cut deepest came from her mother: "You have embarrassed this family." Caroline stared at the words, feeling her stomach drop. It shouldn't have surprised her. Her mother's concern had always been the family name, not her daughter's heart, but this time, the disappointment felt heavier, more cutting. Because this time, she wasn't ashamed of her decision. She was only ashamed of the world's reaction to it. Her brother Samuel arrived at her office without warning, face flushed with irritation, tossing a printed tabloid onto her desk. "What the hell is this, Caroline?" She didn't bother looking at it. "A picture," she said calmly. Samuel jabbed a finger at the page. "A picture of you with a man who looks like he wandered in off a construction site." The words made something cold spread through her chest. "That man has a name," she said. "You don't even know his name," Samuel snapped. "This isn't about him, this is about perception. Investors are calling. The board is furious. And mother, Caroline interrupted warily, is always furious about something that's not new." Samuel shoved the chair back from her desk, pacing. "You can't keep doing this. You're not a teenager rebelling against curfew. You're representing the Sanders legacy, the Sanders brand, the future of this company." And being photographed with, he searched for a word but instead found a sneer. "Him is reckless." Caroline's hands tightened around the edge of the desk. "I invited him because I wanted him there. Not because he fits your mold of acceptability." Samuel shot her a sharp look. "Whether you want to admit it or not, optics matter. And this," he gestured to the tabloid, "is bad optics." "Optics to whom?" she demanded. "Rich people who judge everyone outside their circles. Investors who think community is a liability. Mother who cares more about reputation than her children." Samuel froze mid-step. For a moment he wasn't a corporate executive. He was her brother, a man who understood their upbringing better than anyone. His voice softened. "Care isn't Mother's strong suit. But she is trying to protect the company. Maybe the company needs less protection," Caroline said, "and more direction." But Samuel wasn't listening anymore. He pointed to the tabloid. "You need to fix this. Distance yourself from him. Issue a statement. Say he was a charity guest, not a personal one." The suggestion hit her like a slap. "Reduce Michael to a prop, a per strategy." "A charity case, absolutely not." Caroline stood slowly, her posture tall and unyielding. "I won't do that." "Caroline," I said, "no." Samuel stared at her in disbelief, as if shocked she would defy the family script so directly. But something in Caroline had shifted since that day at the bakery. Since the way Lily had looked up at her with trust. Since the way Michael had shielded his daughter from humiliation. She had seen something real, something her world lacked entirely, and she refused to pretend it hadn't affected her. "This isn't over," Samuel warned before storming out and slamming the door. Caroline leaned back against her desk, breath shaky. She wasn't naive, she knew the Sanders name carried weight, and stepping outside the family's rigid expectations came with consequences. But she was so tired of walking on a path she hadn't chosen, tired of being a symbol instead of a person, tired of living a life filled with luxury but devoid of warmth. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael was experiencing his own version of fallout. When he arrived at the garage, his co-workers greeted him with exaggerated whistles and teasing laughs. "Look at you, Hollywood," one mechanic joked, waving a tabloid someone had printed out. "Didn't know you were dating royalty." Michael snatched the paper, frustration tightening his jaw as he saw a photo of himself mid-blink, looking painfully out of place next to Caroline's poised elegance. "She's not royalty," he muttered, "and I'm not dating anyone. Could be fooled us," another co-worker said. "So what's the story? How'd you end up at a 500 a plate charity gala?" Michael didn't answer. He didn't owe them explanations. But as the teasing continued, the embarrassment deepened, not because of the jokes, but because the world had taken something small and human and turned it into spectacle. And Lily had heard it all. She had been quiet that morning, clinging to his hand as he walked her to press school. When a group of parents whispered while glancing in his direction, Lily tugged his sleeve and asked, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" He had knelt down and hugged her, promising they weren't. But he wasn't sure she believed him. He wasn't sure he believed it either. By lunchtime, he stepped outside needing air. He leaned against the brick wall behind the garage, scrolling through his phone. More photos, more comments, more strangers dissecting his worth. He shoved the phone back into his pocket. He felt trapped between two worlds, one where he didn't belong and another where people now saw him differently because of the first. And worst of all, he knew Caroline was facing worse. He wondered what she was feeling, whether she regretted inviting him, whether her world was punishing her for letting someone like him step into it. Part of him wanted to call her, check on her, thank her again. But another part, the part built from years of being told he wasn't enough, warned him to stay away before things spiraled further. But across town, Caroline was thinking the opposite. She didn't want distance. She didn't want disconnect. She wanted to understand why one evening with a mechanic and his daughter had shaken her more than anything in her career ever had. She wanted to make things right, not for the sake of the tabloids, not for her family's reputation, but because Michael and Lily mattered. They mattered to her, more than she was ready to admit. As the day stretched on, both of them separately but in sync felt the simmering pressure of the world closing in on their unexpected connection. And both of them wondered the same thing. If the world already hated the idea of them standing in the same room, what would it do if they dared to stand even closer? The days after the gala felt heavier for Michael than any work week he'd lived through. The tabloids weren't slowing down, and neither were the whispers at Lily's press school. He tried to shield her from everything, walking her inside with his head down, avoiding the other parents whose polite smiles had shifted into tight, judgmental lines. But children heard things, children always heard things, and adults underestimated how deeply those words could cut. On Wednesday afternoon, when he came to pick her up, Lily wasn't waiting by the classroom door like usual. Instead, her teacher knelt beside her near the reading corner, gently smoothing her hair as Lily wiped tears from her cheeks. The moment Lily saw her father, she rushed into his arms, her small body trembling. Michael lifted her, his heart dropping to his stomach as she buried her face into his neck. On the drive home, Lily was quiet, too quiet. She stared out the window, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. He waited until they were inside the apartment before kneeling in front of her, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "what happened?" Her lip trembled as she whispered, "Some kids said you re on the news because people think you re not good enough." The words hit him like a punch. He swallowed hard. "Not good enough for what?" Lily sniffed. "For the pretty lady." She hesitated. "They said you don't belong with her, and neither do I." Michael pulled her tight, feeling something inside him break. Kids didn't come up with that kind of cruelty on their own. They heard it from parents, from TV, from the world around them, a world already teaching his daughter about class, status, belonging. He closed his eyes, holding Lily until her breathing steadied. He whispered he loved her, that she belonged anywhere she walked, that no one could decide her worth. But even as he said the words, a voice deep inside him whispered a truth he didn't want to face. This was only the beginning. Being near Caroline would put Lily right in the crossfire of judgment, scrutiny, and gossip that no child deserved. He couldn't do that to her. Across the city, Caroline was sitting in a boardroom surrounded by people who looked at her as if she were both a liability and a disappointment. Her mother sat at the head of the table, posture regal, expression sharp enough to cut through steel. "Your decisions," her mother said, "have consequences." Caroline sat with her hands clasped, refusing to shrink. "My decisions," she corrected, "are my own." "You think that," her mother replied, "because you still believe your actions exist in a vacuum. They do not. Every mistake you make, he isn't a mistake." The room fell still. Caroline didn't know she was going to say it until the words were already out. But once spoken, she didn't regret them. Her mother set her jaw. "You are associating our family name with a man who offers nothing to your future." "He offers honesty," Caroline said quietly, "integrity, and he didn't ask for any of this attention. He embarrassed you." "No," Caroline replied firmly, "you did. The press did. This family did." Her mother inhaled sharply, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "This ends now," she declared. "You will release a statement distancing yourself from him. If you do not, we will reconsider your position as CEO." The threat wasn't new. But this time, Caroline felt something within her snap, something that had been stretched too thin for too long. She rose from her seat. "If my career requires me to dehumanize someone who showed me nothing but kindness," she said, "then I don't want the job." Gasps echoed through the room. Samuel leaned forward urgently. "Caroline, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not," she said. "I'm tired." And she meant it not physically, but emotionally. Tired of a life that suffocated her. Tired of expectations that drained her. Tired of pretending she didn't crave something real. She picked up her folder, tucked it under her arm, and walked out without waiting for permission. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, each step filled with determination she hadn't felt in years. The moment the doors closed behind her, she breathed deeply, tasting something unfamiliar: freedom. A terrifying freedom, but freedom nonetheless. She didn't return to her office. Instead, she stepped out into the Seattle air and let the drizzle mist her face. She didn't know where she was going until she found herself on the same bus route she'd taken earlier that week. She boarded it, ignoring the stairs, ignoring her vibrating phone, ignoring the fear that maybe she was making choices she could never undo. The bus rattled down the familiar streets of Tacoma, and with every mile she felt her old life retreating behind her, powerful, wealthy, suffocating. Ahead of her was uncertainty, vulnerability, and maybe heartbreak. But she didn't care. She wanted truth. She wanted something real, something warm. Something human. She reached Michael's apartment building and hesitated at the door. Her heart hammered as she raised her hand and knocked. It took a moment before footsteps approached. When the door opened, Michael stood there, tired, guarded, still impossibly gentle in the way he held himself. His eyes widened when he saw her. Not with anger, not with relief, but with conflict, something heavy. Something she didn't yet understand. "Caroline," he murmured, voice low, "what are you doing here?" She swallowed, her voice unsteady for the first time in years. She breathed out slowly, "I needed to see you." He studied her for a long moment. "This isn't a good time." "Did something happen?" she asked, heart tightening. "Something did," he said, "and I think it's my fault." Those words made her stomach twist. "Michael, what are you talking about?" He stepped outside, closing the door slightly as if shielding Lily from the conversation. "She cried today," he said, voice thick. "Kids made fun of her. Because of the photos, because of the news, because of us." Caroline's breath caught. "Oh my God." "She's 4, Caroline," he said, pain raw in his eyes. "She shouldn't have to deal with this. She shouldn't have to defend me. Or you." Caroline took a step closer, desperate to fix something she didn't know how to mend. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt her." "I know," he said. "But intention doesn't change impact." A long, aching silence stretched between them, not cold, not angry, just unbearably heavy. Caroline let out a trembling breath. "Tell me how to make this right." Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't think you can." Her heart cracked. "Michael, I have to protect her," he said softly, "and right now that means stepping back." The words hit like a blow. She blinked hard, eyes stinging. "So you're re-ending this?" "We never even started," he said gently, painfully. "But yes, for her sake I have to." Caroline swallowed the grief rising in her throat. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But she saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't rejecting her. He was choosing his daughter. And that was exactly why she cared about him in the first place. She nodded slowly. "If that's what you need, I won't stand in your way." He looked at her for a long time, long enough for regret to deepen the lines on his brow. "Take care of yourself, Caroline." She stepped back, the ache in her chest spreading like a bruise. "You too." Then she turned, walked down the hallway, and didn't look back. And as she stepped outside into the drizzle, she realized something devastatingly simple. This was the first time in her life she was losing something she genuinely wanted. For the first time in her adult life, Caroline Sanders walked away from the empire built around her name. The following morning, she entered Sanders Group headquarters not as a dutiful daughter, not as the perfectly groomed CEO her family had molded, but as someone who had already made up her mind to break every expectation chained her since childhood. Her heels echoed sharply across the marble floor, but she felt strangely grounded, as if each step carried her closer to a version of herself she had long buried under obedience and image. Employees looked up, sensing something different in the way she moved, calmer, steadier, more certain, not cold, not fragile, purposeful. She entered the boardroom without waiting for permission. Her mother, Samuel, and several executives were already inside reviewing documents for the merger she had refused to support. Her mother didn't hide her annoyance. "Caroline, if you were here to retract yesterday's outburst, I'm here to resign," Caroline said, placing a crisp envelope on the table. The room erupted instantly. Samuel stood so fast his chair screeched. "You cannot be serious." Her mother inhaled sharply. "You would throw away a legacy a company generations have built because of a man you barely know." Caroline met her mother's eyes steadily, something she had rarely been able to do without shrinking. "I'm not leaving because of him," she said. "I'm leaving because of you. Because of this. Because this company stopped caring about people a long time ago. We care about stability," her mother snapped, "about success. About preserving what your grandfather built. At the cost of everything human," Caroline countered. "You care about numbers, investors, market share, but not about the people living in the communities we pretend to uplift. And definitely not about your children unless it earns you leverage." Gasps echoed around the room. Her mother's face hardened. "You are being emotional." "No," Caroline said quietly, "I'm being honest, maybe for the first time." Samuel stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Caroline, think about what you're redoing. You lose your position, your influence, your security. She repeated with a bitter smile. "I've never been secure in this family. I've only been useful." She slid the envelope closer. "I'm done being useful." Her mother's tone dropped to a cutting whisper. "And what will you be without this company?" "Someone I can live with," Caroline answered, her voice steady with conviction. She turned and walked out before they could say more. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she didn't second-guess herself. Instead, she felt something bloom inside her, terrifying and exhilarating relief. Outside the building, she stepped into the crisp Seattle air and breathed deeply. For once, her life wasn't confined to a boardroom, a penthos, a world that dictated who she could be. She was free. And yet, beneath that newfound freedom, a shadow lingered. Michael. His face when he told her they needed distance. His eyes full of conflict and grief. Lily's small voice echoing in her memory. That pain had pushed her into this decision, yes, but not just because she cared about them. It was because losing them had finally exposed how empty her life truly was. She didn't want to return to the cold, curated existence she'd maintained for years. She wanted meaning. She wanted to feel like her choices mattered. She wanted to stop pretending. She spent the early afternoon walking through Seattle with no destination in mind, past small bookstores, past cafes with ladders spilling onto sidewalks, past families sharing meals outdoors. Every glimpse of normal life tugged at something deep inside her, a longing she had suppressed since childhood. She wanted warmth. She wanted authenticity, wanted connection, and finally, after hours of wandering, she realized what she needed to do. Not for the company, not for her family, for herself. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael spent the day in a quiet turmoil he hadn't felt in years. He tried focusing on work, but every time he tightened a bolt or changed a filter, he saw Caroline's expression from the night before, the devastation she had tried so hard to hide when he told her they had to step back. He hated hurting her, he hated how her face haunted him. But he hated even more that Lily had cried because of something she didn't choose. He told himself he had done the right thing. Protecting his daughter always came first. And yet, why did doing the right thing feel so unbearably heavy? Why did the garage feel colder? Why did the silence in his apartment last night feel sharper? Why did every memory of Caroline, the softness in her voice, the kindness in her eyes, tighten his chest instead of fading? Toward evening, he picked up Lily from press school. She was quieter than usual but hugged him tightly, resting her head against his shoulder as they walked home. He carried her up the stairs, set her down gently, and started dinner. But even as he cooked, his thoughts drifted back to Caroline, whether she was okay, whether she regretted meeting him, whether she blamed herself for everything. He didn't know that at that exact moment, Caroline was standing in front of her penthouse windows, staring out at the city lights with determination building in her chest. She had lost her title, her influence, the role she had been forced into since birth, but she hadn't lost her choice, and she finally knew what choice she wanted to make. The sky was darkening when she grabbed her coat and headed toward the door, not in a chauffeured SUV, not in a sleek company car, but on foot. She took the elevator down, crossed the lobby as security guards glanced at her in surprise, and stepped into the cool evening. She headed toward the bus stop, the same route she had taken to find Michael before. The same route she now took, not out of curiosity, but with purpose. She didn't know what she would say. She only knew she had to say something, that she had to see him, that she had to try. The bus ride felt longer than usual, every stop stretching time like elastic. She held the handrail tightly, her heart pounding with uncertainty. She had walked away from everything she knew, but this moment scared her more than any resignation. Because this wasn't about business. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about vulnerability. About admitting she cared for someone whose world didn't match hers, whose life carried scars she couldn't begin to understand. But she cared anyway. When the bus finally reached Michael's neighborhood, she stepped off and walked the familiar path toward his building. The windows glowed warm against the night, a stark contrast to the sterile lighting of her penthouse. She paused outside his door, breathing deeply, steadying herself. Then she raised her hand and knocked. Inside, Michael froze. Lily looked up from her coloring book. Daddy, he didn't answer. He knew that knock. He felt it before he processed it. He opened the door slowly. And there she was. Hair windswept, breath unsteady, eyes with something fierce and fragile all at once. Caroline, he whispered. She swallowed hard. I quit my job. He blinked. What? She stepped closer, voice trembling with conviction. I quit Sanders' group. I walked away from my family's expectations. I walked away from everything they tried to force onto me. And I did it because I finally realized something. She took a breath that shook. I want a life that feels real. I want to choose my own story. And I want to choose who I care about. Michael's chest tightened. Caroline. She shook her head gently. Let me finish. Her eyes softened. You gave up something important last night. You chose Lily. And that is exactly why her voice cracked, why I'm choosing you. Michael stared at her, stunned. Caroline stepped even closer. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know I'm not walking away. For the first time in days, the weight pressing on Michael's heart lifted, not completely, but enough for him to breathe. Enough for him to hope. Enough for him to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't meant to end this way. And as they stood there, two people from worlds never meant to intertwine, something shifted. Not destiny. Not fate. Choice. A choice powerful enough to fight for. Michael didn't know how long he stood there in the doorway, staring at Caroline as her words echoed through him like an aftershock. She had quit her job, she had walked away from her family's empire, and she was here on his doorstep in Tacoma, rain catching on her eyelashes telling him she chose him. No one had ever chosen him like that, Not without conditions, not without expectations, not without wanting something in return. For a moment he couldn't breathe, because the weight of her choice pressed against everything inside him: gratitude, fear, longing, disbelief. Lily peeked out from behind his leg, eyes curious, small voice whispering, "Miss Caroline." Caroline's expression softened immediately. She knelt down, her knees touching the worn welcome mat. The elegant woman transformed into someone gentle, present, and real. "Hi, sweetheart," she murmured. "I didn't mean to interrupt your evening." Lily stepped closer. "Did you come to play?" Caroline let out a breathy laugh, one filled with tenderness. "If your daddy lets me." Lily turned to Michael with an expectant look that crushed whatever resistance he thought he still had left. His daughter wanted her there. His daughter trusted her, and Michael's heart, already bruised from the days before, began to thaw beneath the warmth of that truth. He stepped aside slowly. "Come in." Caroline entered the apartment with quiet hesitation, as if afraid she might break something, not physically, but the fragile space between them. She glanced around, taking in the modest living room, the scattered crayons, the crocheted blanket over the sofa. Nothing like her pristine penthouse. But to her, this space felt alive. It felt lived in. It felt like everything she didn't know she wanted until she lost it. Michael closed the door behind her, feeling tension coil inside him. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do: hug her, avoid her, ask her why she would make such a monumental decision for someone like him. She stood in the middle of the living room, unsure of her place, unsure if she belonged there, until Lily grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the couch. "Come sit," Lily said brightly, and Caroline followed, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael watched them from across the room, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, not out of anger but out of overwhelming emotion he didn't know how to manage. He had never been good with vulnerability. He had built his life around necessity, practicality, responsibility. Nothing about her felt simple enough for him to categorize. Caroline glanced up at him, her eyes soft, searching his, silently asking permission to be there. He didn't answer with words. He simply nodded once slowly, and she seemed to understand. After settling Lily with her coloring book, Caroline stood and walked toward him. Her steps were tentative, like she wasn't sure how close he would let her get. When she stopped a few feet away, she exhaled shakily. "I'm not here to make things harder," she said. "I'm not here to confuse you. I just needed you to know that I didn't walk away from my life for something impulsive." She paused. "I walked away because my life wasn't truly mine. And because meeting Lily made me realize how much I've been missing." Michael's jaw clenched. "Caroline, let me finish," she whispered. "I'm not asking for anything right now, not a relationship, not a promise, not even forgiveness. I just didn't want to disappear from your life without telling you the truth." Her eyes glistened with emotion she refused to let fall. "The truth is, you and Lily changed something in me." Michael's breath caught. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to step forward, take her hands, tell her he felt something too, something deep, something he was terrified of. But fear held him back, not fear of her. Fear of what the world would do to Lily if he let Caroline back into their lives. Fear of the scrutiny, the judgment, the whispers that already bruised his daughter's heart. "I can't let her get hurt again," he said quietly. "I know," Caroline replied, "and I would never ask you to." Their eyes locked, a storm of longing and restraint passing silently between them. Then Lily called from the couch, "Daddy, can Miss Caroline stay for dinner?" Michael's heart twisted. He looked at Caroline. She smiled, not brightly, not confidently, but tentatively, as if bracing for a rejection she would accept without complaint. "It's okay," she murmured. "I can go. I didn't come to intrude." But Lily was already tugging at her hand, insistent and hopeful. Caroline glanced down, then up at Michael again. "Only if you want me to stay." Michael hesitated. Every responsible part of him screamed to keep distance. The part of him that hadn't felt warmth in years, the part that saw how gently she treated Lily, how sincerely she spoke, how earnestly she tried one out. "You can stay," he said. Caroline's smile was small but luminous, the kind that softened everything around her. They cooked a simple dinner together, Michael preparing pasta, Caroline handing him ingredients, Lily chattering nonstop. For the first time since the gala, laughter filled the apartment again. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Caroline felt herself taking mental snapshots of every moment, Michael stirring the pot with focused intensity, Lily insisting her stuffed bunny needed a seat at the table, the warmth of the dim kitchen light wrapping around them like something sacred. At the table, Caroline sat across from Michael, watching him interact with his daughter. The tenderness in his eyes, the patience in his voice, the ease with which he guided Lily's hands as she sprinkled cheese over her meal, all of it made her chest ache. She had seen powerful men her whole life, but none had carried strength the way he did, quiet, steady, rooted in love rather than ego. And Michael, despite everything, couldn't stop his eyes from drifting to her. When she laughed at one of Lily's jokes, something bright lit inside him. When she helped Lily wipe sauce from her chin, something warm spread through his chest. When she looked at him with gratitude for the meal, for the moment, for the chance to be there, something in him softened dangerously. After dinner, after Lily fell asleep curled on the couch, Michael and Caroline stood by the door, facing one another in the low hum of the quiet apartment. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said softly. "It meant more than you realize." Michael nodded, his voice low. "Thank you for being good to her." Caroline looked at him, really looked, her eyes full of emotion and unspoken hope. "If you let me, I want to be good to both of you." Michael's breath trembled. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "So am I." Their faces were inches apart now, the air thick with the possibility neither dared reach for completely. "But I'm not running anymore," she said. "Not from you, not from this." Michael's heart pounded, his fears fought his desires. But then he remembered Lily's laughter at dinner, the softness in Caroline's voice, the way she had walked away from an empire for her own truth, and for the first time his fears didn't win. He reached up, brushing a raindrop from her cheek that had dried into a faint shimmer. "Then don't run," he whispered. Caroline exhaled shakily, eyes closing for a heartbeat. "I won't." And though they didn't kiss, though they didn't cross that final line, the moment felt like its own kind of promise. A fragile one, a trembling one, but a real one. A beginning. The weeks that followed moved with a gentleness Michael hadn't felt in years, a kind of quiet unfolding that didn't rush forward but grew naturally, like a sunrise gradually warming the sky. Caroline didn't force her way into their lives, she simply returned slowly, consistently, respectfully. Some evenings she visited after work, still wearing her corporate dresses even though she no longer belonged to the tower she had left behind. Other times she arrived in jeans and a cardigan, looking more like someone finding herself than someone escaping a legacy. And Lily adored her. She drew pictures of Daddy and Miss Caroline holding hands, taped them onto the fridge, and insisted that Caroline needed her own toothbrush at the apartment. The innocence of it made Michael's chest ache with something beautiful and frightening all at once. He tried not to let things move too fast. He tried to keep distance where distance was responsible. But every time Caroline showed up with a story for Lily, or helped with dinner, or stayed late talking quietly with him on the worn-out couch while Lily slept nearby, the distance shrank on its own. And soon Michael wasn't fighting it anymore. They started spending weekends together, simple things, small things, real things. They took Lily to the farmer's market, where Caroline tasted kettle corn for the first time. She laughed so hard when Lily shoved a fistful into her mouth that Michael found himself laughing too, unable to look away from the brightness in her eyes. They spent afternoons at the park, where Lily played on the swings while Caroline told Michael about her new consulting job, nothing glamorous like her old position, but honest work, meaningful work. She helped community organizations secure funding, advocating for projects she actually believed in. He could see how the shift grounded her. She wasn't the CEO anymore, but she was more herself than he had ever seen her. Sometimes after Lily was tucked in bed, Michael and Caroline sat on the apartment balcony with mugs of warm tea, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. They talked about everything, childhood memories, fears, dreams neither had dared voice before. Michael told her about Lily's mother, how they had been young and hopeful and unprepared for the storms as life threw at them. Caroline shared how she had spent her whole life chasing approval she never truly received, and how freeing it felt to no longer live for someone else's expectations. And somewhere between those conversations, somewhere between the shared silences and unspoken tenderness, they found themselves stepping closer, not with declarations, not with dramatic confessions, but with small gestures that spoke louder than words. Michael would brush a stray curl from Caroline's face. She would rest her hand near his on the couch, close enough for their fingers to touch. When she laughed, he felt lighter. When he looked at her, she felt seen. It was a slow, careful, powerful falling, and neither of them tried to stop it anymore. But it wasn't until the end of the month that everything shifted from almost love to something undeniable. One Saturday morning, Caroline arrived with grocery bags full of ingredients Lily had requested for a pancake castle. Lily squealed with excitement while Michael tried not to smile too big as they unpacked the supplies together. The kitchen became a chaotic mess of flour, berries, and laughter. Michael flipped pancakes while Caroline arranged them into towers. Lily insisted on adding whipped cream clouds around the edges. By the time they finished, the so-called pancake castle leaned dangerously to one side, but Lily declared it perfect. After breakfast, Lily ran to her room to put on her princess dress, and in the sudden quiet, Michael found himself standing beside Caroline amid the kitchen mess. He turned to say something, he wasn't even sure what, but froze when he saw her expression. She was watching him with a softness that made his breath catch, and then she stepped closer, not timidly, not hesitantly, but with a certainty that made Michael's heart pound. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to really hear me." He nodded, unable to look away. "I don't miss my old life," she said. "Not the job, not the money, not the reputation. I thought losing everything would feel like falling apart. But it doesn't. It feels like beginning again. And this," she gestured subtly around the apartment, "this feels like the first place I've ever wanted to belong." Michael's chest tightened. "Caroline, you don't have to say anything," she murmured. "I just needed you to know." He stepped closer, his voice quiet. "What if I want to say something?" She blinked, surprised but hopeful. "Then say it." Michael reached out and took her hand slowly, gently, like he was afraid she might disappear. "I didn't think I'd ever let someone in again," he admitted. "Not after everything, not with Lily." "But you," his voice cracked. "You showed up when I wasn't ready, and somehow you exactly what I didn't know I needed." Her breath trembled. Then Michael whispered, "Stay," just one word, but it carried every emotion he had tried so long to bury. Caroline stepped closer until there was no distance left between them. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered back. And then, for the first time, he leaned in and kissed her, a slow, deep, etching kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like finally coming home. Her hands curled into his shirt, his arms wrapped around her waist, drawing her in. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real and it was theirs. When they finally pulled away, breathless and stunned, Lily yelled from the hallway, "Daddy." "Miss Caroline, my dress is crooked." The moment was broken, but the warmth lingered between them like a promise. Michael laughed softly, touching his forehead to Caroline's before stepping back. "You ready to help fix a princess dress?" he asked. Caroline grinned, "Absolutely." That afternoon, they walked to the park, the three of them, a little mismatched, a little uncertain, but undeniably becoming a family. Michael pushed Lily on the swings while Caroline sat beside him on the bench, their shoulders touching, fingers woven together. The sun peeked through the clouds, warming the chilly Seattle air. Lily's laughter echoed across the playground, and for the first time in years, Michael felt a peace so full it almost hurt. Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. "Lately," he replied. "More than I used to." "What do you see?" He looked at Lily soaring into the sky, at Caroline leaning against him, at the life unfolding gently before him. "This," he said simply, "I see this." And Caroline smiled, a soft, radiant smile that made him believe, truly believe, that maybe the world could be good. Maybe the storm had passed. Maybe the life he never thought he deserved was finally finding its way to him. As the day faded into evening, they walked home hand in hand while Lily skipped ahead. Their mismatched little trio. Their imperfect but beautiful beginning. Their family. Not by accident. Not by fate. But by choice. A choice all three of them made again and again, day after day. A choice that felt like love. The story of Michael, Lily, and Caroline teaches a lesson far deeper than a romance between two people from opposite worlds. It reveals what it means to choose compassion in a world that often values status over humanity. At its core, the narrative reminds us that kindness, even when expressed in the smallest gesture, carries the power to shift the entire direction of someone's life. One moment in a Seattle bakery, one act of empathy from a woman who had everything to a man who had almost nothing became the thread that pulled two very different lives together. But more importantly, it exposed how rare genuine connection is in a society obsessed with appearances, wealth, and social hierarchies. It showed that sometimes people don't need perfection from us, they need to be seen, acknowledged, and treated with simple dignity. Caroline didn't save Michael, and Michael didn't save Caroline. What they saved was the part of themselves that had long been silenced by expectation, burden, and loneliness. Another powerful lesson woven into their journey is the importance of choosing authenticity over the comfort of fitting in. Caroline spent her life in a world polished to perfection, a world where emotions were liabilities and success was defined by profit margins and public image. Yet none of that ever gave her the warmth she found in a cramped Tacoma apartment or the laughter she shared with a 4-year-old girl who welcomed her without hesitation. Her decision to walk away from the Sanders legacy wasn't a sacrifice for love, it was a reclaiming of her identity. She realized that wealth without meaning is just a cage made of gold, and that no title or inheritance can replace the fulfillment that comes from genuine human relationships. The story teaches us that sometimes the bravest act we can commit is choosing the life that feels right instead of the one that looks right. It encourages us to challenge expectations placed on us by family, society, or even our own fears, because happiness rarely grows in the spaces people force us into. True happiness grows where our choices are rooted in truth, vulnerability, and intention. For Michael, the lesson lies in understanding that accepting help doesn't diminish a person, it expands them. His greatest struggle wasn't financial hardship, it was carrying the belief that needing others made him inadequate. Years of survival had built walls around his pride, convincing him that love could only exist if he bore every burden alone. But when Caroline showed up consistently with respect, with sincerity, with no intention to replace him or rescue him, Michael learned something profoundly human. Strength does not come from isolation, but from connection. Asking for nothing, she gave him a space where he didn't have to be perfect, where he was allowed to rest, to breathe, to exist without constantly fighting the world. And in doing so, she taught him that providing for Lily didn't have to mean denying himself the possibility of love. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give their child is not just protection, but the willingness to open the door to people who will love them too. Michael learned that love isn't a threat to responsibility, it's a reinforcement of it. Lily's role in the story highlights another beautiful lesson: children don't judge the way adults do. She didn't care about wealth, social class, or reputation. She saw kindness and responded with trust. She saw warmth and offered love. Her innocence stripped away the layers of complication adults create around relationships. And through her eyes, both Michael and Caroline were reminded that connection can be pure, simple, and unconditional. Lily's uncomplicated acceptance of Caroline teaches us that sometimes life is not asking us to analyze every outcome or fear every potential hurt. Sometimes life is asking us to say, I like this person, they make my world better, and that alone is enough reason to hold on. Lily reminds us that love in its most natural form is not strategic or hesitant, it is open-hearted. And adults would do well to remember that part of themselves before the world taught them to fear vulnerability. Perhaps the most profound lesson in this story is that healing often happens in unexpected places and through unexpected people. Caroline didn't know she was searching for a family until she stepped into Michael's world. Michael didn't know he still had space in his heart until Caroline gently walked into it. And Lily didn't know she needed another figure of warmth and stability until Caroline became that for her. All three were missing something essential: connection, belonging, safety, and without intending to, they became that missing piece for one another. The story teaches us that family is not defined solely by blood or societal structure, but by choice, by effort, by consistency, by the small rituals of everyday life: shared meals, inside jokes, quiet moments on the couch, helping a child fix her princess dress. Family grows out of presence, not perfection. And love grows from grand gestures, but from the moments you choose someone again and again, even when life makes it complicated. Finally, the story reminds us that real love is not about rescuing someone or making their world easier. It is about walking beside them even when the world watches, judges, or misunderstands. It is about standing firm when others try to pry you apart. It is about choosing each other not because the journey will be simple, but because it is worth it. Caroline chose Michael despite the noise of the world. Michael chose Caroline despite the risks. And both chose Lily not as an accessory to their story, but as the heart of it. Their lives intertwined not through convenience, but through courage: the courage to show up, to stay, to trust, and to begin again. This story teaches that in a world obsessed with status, the bravest thing we can do is let love guide us instead of fear, and that the most sacred relationships are often born not from perfection, but from brokenness met with grace. In the end, the lesson is simple yet powerful: love has the extraordinary ability to transform lives when it is rooted in kindness, authenticity, and the willingness to choose each other even when the world tells you not to. Love is not what happens to you. Love is what you choose to fight for. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.